Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Trinity Church. It's wonderful to see all of you here tonight. We have a very special evening. My name's Peggy Hodgkins, and I'm the rector, which is, if you don't know the Episcopal terminology, that means like a senior minister here. And we're thrilled to have a new education committee that has been bringing in servant leader speakers. It's a new goal of ours to promote servant leadership. So those who serve and lead at the same time. And so Shoshana Stewart's here tonight as part of our Servant Leader series. I'd like to thank April Gow for inviting Shoshana to be with us tonight here at Trinity. I'd also like to offer a very special welcome to our University of Bridgeport graduate students who are here. What a treat to see all of you. You have come as far as Larchmont, I understand, and Westchester. Thank you for taking the time to come and share this night with us. I'd also like to thank Sissy Biggers and Jen Cargill, who have offered the Southport galleries for a reception and a trunk show of some wonderful crafts from Afghanistan that everyone's invited to a reception right after this talk. And it's just down Pequot Avenue, so it's in the heart of the village, just about a block and a half. You pass another church, and it'll be on your left. It's like a 5-minute walk, so if you want to walk or hitchhike. So thank you, Robin Hodgkins, for videoing our event tonight, and thank you, everybody, for being here. So I'm going to turn it over to April, who will introduce Shoshana a little more.
Thank you, Peggy. And welcome, everyone. So delighted that you're here with us tonight for another exciting Servant Leader program. I want to welcome my good friend Shoshana Stewart. This is sort of her stomping grounds, being from Connecticut, and she's home with her family for Thanksgiving. So we were lucky that we were able to schedule this. Shoshana lives in London and is the CEO of Turquoise, which is a British charity that operates in Kabul, Afghanistan. Turquoise Mountain was the vision and the brainchild of Prince of Wales when he met with President Karzai a number of years ago, probably about 2005. And Prince of Wales asked President Karzai about the traditional crafts of Afghanistan. And President Karzai responded, "Yes, I used to see them in the marketplace, but we don't see them anymore." So that was the moment when the Prince of Wales decided that he could find a wonderful cause to champion and help the people of Afghanistan. And he then tapped a rather extraordinary young person called Rory Stewart, who you may remember wrote this extraordinary book called The Places in Between, when he walked across Iran and Afghanistan to Bangladesh in 2002. And lived to tell the tale. He says today he probably wouldn't live to tell the tale. So obviously 2002, even just after 9/11 in 2001, Afghanistan was still, was a different place. So tonight you're going to hear this remarkable story, and you know, I've known Shoshana a number of years. I met Rory in 2008 when he first came to America to fundraise and to tell everyone about this project. And I think Shoshana started working in 2007 in Kabul, so early days. And so now 10 years later, 10 short years later, they've accomplished the most extraordinary miracle in the old city of Kabul. And the net of this, which you'll hear about, is that something like $4 million worth of beautiful arts and crafts have been sold in the West, in the international market. And it started from nothing because the craftspeople hadn't worked in the crafts industry for a number of years because of the war. And so they were selling fruits and vegetables in the marketplace. They were doing anything but crafts. They had no apprentices, they had no workshops, they had no materials. So you're going to hear this amazing story, and I'm so delighted Shoshana's here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
so much for coming, and happy holidays to everybody. As April said, it's a real pleasure to be here in particular. I run around the world talking about Afghan crafts, but rarely where I'm actually from. So very nice to be in Connecticut. And I suppose what I'd like to do is tell you how I suppose I got from Connecticut to Afghanistan, what's going on in Afghanistan, and why I'm back here in Connecticut, besides just being here for Thanksgiving. So, as April said, it was actually late 2006. I was a 26-year-old teacher. I did Teach for America in New York City and in Boston, and I went to Afghanistan. I knew nothing about the country. I had an astrophysics degree, which had absolutely nothing to do with Afghanistan or crafts, and I showed up as a volunteer. Wanted to be abroad again. So let me tell you about the history of the project, what we're doing now, and why I suppose this stuff matters, why I think it matters going forward. So 2006, as April said, were created by Prince Charles and former President Karzai of Afghanistan. Two goals: rebuild the old city of Kabul and rebuild the Afghan traditional craft industry. We're a cultural preservation organization, we're a nonprofit. This used to be an incredible historic area with traditional crafts, historic buildings, wonderful silver bazaar. But when Rory, at that point my boss, more recently my husband, found it, it was 6 feet deep in garbage. All the historic buildings were collapsing, 1 in 5 children dying before the age of 10, incredible poverty. There's basically no water supply, sanitation, electricity. It was raw sewage in the streets. All the craft masters were destitute. This was Afghanistan 2002 and still 2006. So the first thing we did was to just start clearing garbage. We didn't use any big machines, we just had wheelbarrows and shovels. This is sort of before, during, and after. We started to restore the smaller buildings first, as sort of a family home, before, during, and after, and then put in water supply, sanitation, electricity down every street to every house. We trained everybody on the job, so we trained about 5,000 Afghans in traditional building skills. This is a lot of them on one given day. My head engineer Hidayat there, me standing slightly awkwardly away from the man on the roof. So then, meanwhile, that's sort of the old city urban regeneration. In the craft industry, this is Abdul Hadi. He was 72 when we met him, and he was the great lattice woodworker of Afghanistan. He makes this incredible technique of lattice woodwork, which is made entirely without nails. It's all individually jointed. And he used to work for the king. He was a famous man, but when we met him, he was, as April said, selling bananas in the bazaar, and had been for 15 years. He didn't have any students, he didn't have any markets. Finished. That's how the craft industry dies, and this has been going on for decades at this point. So we rounded up all of these retired craft masters, put students and equipment in the same room as them, and started to train, to retrain. We started building ourselves a school. So this is School of Woodworking, Calligraphy and Miniature Painting, Ceramics, and Jewelry and Gem Cutting. So we begin training. We realized very quickly that the training is great, but it doesn't matter if they can't sell these things. You have to have the economic drive behind them. So started trying to sell these things. Easier said than done. You know, Afghanistan is a landlocked country. Very difficult in terms of borders. A lot of money's come into the country, so wages are slightly inflated. But we began to get international designers in, started to learn some of the more difficult lessons about international exports. This is our first big commission in hotels. It's a 5-star hotel in London called the Home, and they commissioned an entire suite of Afghan woodwork. So everything from this carved walnut wood bed to the cabinets and the window bays, which aren't in the picture, carved doors and carved windows. There are other parts of the project that we really didn't expect, but you know, when you work in a community of people and nobody's going to school and nobody's going to a doctor, you just deal with it. So we started a literacy program. 100 kids showed up the next day, and we said, great. Half of them were girls, double great, but the fathers were nervous about what the girls were going to be learning, so we just lined them up on the back of the classroom and had them watch lessons, and they sat there for 2 weeks, and then they were slightly bored, and they went home, and it was fine. So now there's primary school. So there are about 200 kids at any given time, K through 6, going to this school, half girls and half boys. And then a clinic, which again started as this referral service from the local hospital, a sort of volunteer doctor. Dr. Farouk came 2 times a week, it grew, demanded more, and it now serves about 20,000 patients a year, 70% of whom are women and kids. So fast forward, you get this, obviously timestamp 2007. So we restored the buildings. This is before and after. Then we did this on about 110 buildings, before and after. And we won a UNESCO Heritage Award for that building. And this building is also the home of this institute. So this is actually a calligraphy building. So the institute director's office is there. Those are all calligraphy classrooms. This is smack in the middle of the old city, and students graduate after a 3-year course, it's a serious degree, and they get international accreditation. Graduate, they set up businesses, and we have sold about $5 million worth of these things internationally, in the West, in the Gulf, even in Japan. About 2.5 years ago, April took me in to see the guy on the left, Julian Raby, who is a very, very wonderful director of the Freer and Sackler Galleries of the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. And April and Julian know each other well, and she brought me in, and I sort of gave him a bit of a slideshow like I've just given you, thinking, oh, this is the Smithsonian, wouldn't it be lovely if he... And Julian said, right, we're rebuilding the old city in the basement of the Sackler. And off it went. So this exhibition opened 9 months ago. It's called Turquoise Mountain, Artists Transforming Afghanistan. And what happens is you enter, I suppose, with an idea of Afghanistan, bombs, burqas, the Taliban, terrorists, and then you meet Saida. And Saida is in a full-screen video of her speaking and her story. You get this, which is a 360 emerald piece. It's a Turkmen design inspired, but it's an original piece designed between Saida and Episcopal, who's a British jeweler, Britain's ethical jeweler of the year last year. So they make this piece. You learn about the story of Panjshiri emeralds and lapis lazuli and all of the incredible minerals of Afghanistan. Saida's personal story, she, like nearly every artist we work with, honestly, was a refugee, grew up in Pakistan, got meningitis when she was younger, so she's been deaf her entire life. So you meet her, you hear her story, you meet Nasser, who makes this incredible lattice woodwork now. He was Abdul Hadi's major protege. And then you pick up pieces of this lattice. And we have lights everywhere, so you can see how the patterns create light patterns on the floor. You can see the texture of the wood. He talks about how this transports him. So, and you meet 5 individuals, 5 crafts, 5 stories. So you begin with bombs, burqas, Taliban terrorism, and you leave with a different sense of Afghanistan, a sort of more textured, more human sense. And I would argue not only of Afghanistan, but probably of Islam. Through people, through art, through beautiful things, through stories, through emeralds and lapis lazuli. And it's been an extraordinary thing. I mean, even a surprise to me, and I've been doing this for 10 years. 200,000 people have been through this exhibition. We've counted every one of them, believe me. And it is genuinely changing the way people look at this country and many more things. Obviously, we have a very difficult relationship with Afghanistan. Some people even more intensely difficult relationships. And there is something about art that is really connecting people. It's been wonderful. I mean, we're just getting people sort of breaking down in tears quite a lot, which is very moving. There's a Peace Corps volunteer who was in Afghanistan, and my sort of deputy, Tommy, came up behind him and tapped him on the shoulder, and sort of was crying, and he said, I thought all of this was gone. And it's just wonderful for people to react. Kids are playing in there, you can pick things up. So I think that the exhibition has been a wonderful, very moving thing. which I'm hoping will travel. The Smithsonian's just asked us to extend it for 6 months, which, which is a surprise. I thought 9 months was a long time already, but it's just had such a great reaction. So we're hoping to travel it and hoping to travel to the UK also, because I think that this sort of healing experience, which is what it ends up being, about this country, which has been in our minds so much. I think it would be nice to do that in Britain as well. So that's the Smithsonian. And I suppose, just wanted to tell you about what we're doing at the moment, what this looks like now. So, Cultural Preservation Organization, set up. It feels to me like the further we get along, honestly, the better we get at this, the more hard lessons have been learned. The more we move along this spectrum of, if you have sort of nonprofit charity work here, and you have business here, we are beginning to exist in this middle bit. People call it social enterprise, social impact, social entrepreneurship. It's about doing well by doing good. To give you an example, and I think it works. I think it is the future, particularly for the craft side of what we do. Give you a couple of examples. One is marketing, right? When we started this, I was basically trying to sell those earrings that you see to, diplomats in Kabul, like one-off carved pieces of woodwork with their name in it, to sort of foreigners, NGO workers in Kabul. Now, what marketing looks like is serious market segmentation. So, jewelry, which is probably the most successful craft for us right now, selling mostly in North America and Europe. These are often orders in the thousands to the tens of thousands. For Kate Spade, you can shop in Nordstrom's right now and get pieces made by us. And individuals, the trunk show tonight, that's exactly the type of thing that this was. Then you've got calligraphy of woodwork selling very well in the Middle East. That usually happens in the hundreds of thousands of dollars order. That may be obvious, but you get many fewer of those, right, for five-star hotels. You've got carpets that sell everywhere. So where do you focus your energy? This is a very normal business question. It's a very normal thing that a young business ought to be dealing with. Be serious about where you're going to sell. Don't just sell to, I can sell Afghan crafts on any continent, and we have actually, except Antarctica. But that's not a marketing strategy. If you want to be serious about making this work for these artisan businesses, for Nasser's business, he employs 30 people. It's an independent business. You got to look at market segmentation properly. Also, I used to think that people would pay a premium for social impact. So if you would pay $75 for these earrings, if you knew that it was responsibly sourced and that it was an Afghan woman making it, you might pay $100. I don't believe it anymore. I think that the reality of these things, and we should embrace it, is that we have to be competitive on design, quality, and price. And then if you put these two things up in front of this audience, that many of you, more of you, will begin choosing the one that is responsibly sourced and has a story behind it. But that's right. That's what it is. That's the reality of the way people buy things. And I suppose logistics is another example. Afghanistan is a landlocked country, and its sort of most convenient borders are Pakistan and Iran. These are not the easiest ways to get container loads of things out. That's always going to be an issue, and we have always been dealing with it. But what we're dealing with increasingly is also questions about distribution points. Because again, if you're being serious about the way that small businesses live and die on cash flow, distribution bottlenecks, and these are the realities of things that we're dealing with at the moment. So it is funny, and I think right, that we are beginning to exist in this kind of middle ground of social enterprise. And I suppose the last thing that I want to talk about is just the future. So our challenge, I think, is what is the place for traditional crafts and traditional skills in the modern world and in the global economy? And why does that matter? It matters because, it matters because of Samira, as an example. So we met her when she was 19. In fact, I realized that this picture was actually taken when she was 19 in her first year in front of the door of my house in Kabul. She was a student at the Turquoise Mountain Institute, went there for 3 years, graduated, and Samira today is a 25-year-old woman who, in her first year of business, trained and employed 30 other women and exported $100,000 worth of calligraphy and miniature painting to a 5-star hotel in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. This is women's empowerment. This is economic development. I mean, this is real stuff. But the international development industry sort of doesn't take traditional crafts seriously. You know, on the best days, it's sort of called creative industries. And on the worst days, it's called basket weaving. But this is not a serious development priority. I mean, it's a sort of peripheral thing. The British Council funds it, private people fund it. It's art and culture, right? I think it's wrong. I think we're missing something there. The traditional craft industry, and in particular luxury crafts, are one of the fastest growing parts of the global economy. The industry, the demand for ethical, sustainable goods is measured in hundreds of billions of dollars annually right now. So you've got this fantastic route to economic development in an industry which historically employs women, naturally, culturally. And you've seen this from India to Morocco. So I think this is an incredible opportunity that in Afghanistan, but in lots of other places too. We're working now in Myanmar, in bits of the Middle East. This is a way to build the economy of Afghanistan by harnessing this sort of energy of its history and culture and being driven basically by Afghan female entrepreneurs. So I think this is a really serious development priority, and it's a lot of fun and some beautiful stuff. So thank you very much for coming and for listening, for being interested. Studying this, I'd love to hear what you think. Please.
I'm wondering about the embroidery craft. Will you be developing that? Because that's very much women's.
Yes, thank you for asking. Yeah. So the 4 crafts that we started out in, we've now basically expanded into carpets and textiles over the last 2 years. So embroidery, so it's a combination of fabrics. So you've got in particular hand-dyed and naturally dyed, hand-woven and naturally dyed silks. And then you've got very beautiful and differing by region embroidery. So yeah, that is something that they do very beautifully. And that though, again, to the sort of we're moving more toward business, I suppose. You know, what are you going to sell? You know, what happens is that people make scarves, right? And the MoMA shop can only buy so many scarves from different random countries around the world. So we have to be serious about products, but also that doesn't mean just start making jackets, because fashion is a really serious industry, sizing and fitting, and you know, if you can even figure out how to make a decently shaped size 8, 10, and 12, how many of each are you going to make? I mean, this is why actually each of these industries is difficult and different. But I think for textiles, homewares seems to work very well, yeah. Home decor, exactly. Then, I mean, this is really interesting. This is sort of my life right now. It's gone from garbage clearance to like the homewares department in Macy's. If you're going to sell cushion covers, you really need to sell the whole staple. And in fact, this is even more relevant for us in the tabletop. Right, so we sell ceramics, we sell bowls. We sell Hirati glass, this beautiful colored hand-blown glass. It doesn't make sense to buyers if you're just selling plates and glasses. They also want napkins and table runners, which is where textiles comes in. But it's totally ridiculous to walk in to a department store and talk to them, talk to the buyer in the homeware section unless you have the whole tabletop covered. So these are the types of things. And then it's a question of, well, do you focus on that, or do you say, no, we're not doing that. Actually, carpets is a much more significant thing, and we're quite small, we need to invest in that. So these are the types of things that we're sort of juggling at the moment, and I think we should be juggling.
Shoshana, you talked about, in the very beginning, you had 2 goals, and I wonder if you can talk about the future of Turquoise Mountain more broadly. In other words, will you take those 2 goals in Myanmar to someday to Syria to,
Yep.
how do you decide
Yeah.
where to go?
It's a great question. First of all, the goals, to my slight continuing surprise, have remained identical. I mean, I'm quite proud of that, but the potential for mission drift in a sort of chaotic environment is very high, right? We set out to do buildings and crafts. We did buildings and crafts, we still do buildings and crafts, and actually now that we're in Myanmar, we're doing buildings and crafts. So that's working very well. The question also about expansion, I was so nervous about expanding. I mean, I sort of did a TED talk, a TEDx talk about this years ago, and in preparation for it, I basically figured out that one of my guiding principles is you don't cookie cutter these things. This is all about the local. It's all about speaking Dari and knowing that one community. The World Bank tried to pay us and give us money to do this in 10 different neighborhoods in Kabul, like 8 years ago. We said no to it because we were just beginning to understand the intricacies of this one neighborhood and what the different, what the conflict was between Kaka Azim and Haji Gul and everything else. That's the only way this works, is by understanding those things. So I was very nervous about expanding. We took on this project in Myanmar because we were specifically asked by Aung San Suu Kyi, as she was beginning to get momentum to be elected, to come in, and we did. And it's actually been great. I think what matters is that we know what we're good at and what we don't do, I suppose. But then knowing that it's going to be completely different in the country you're in. So doing it in Myanmar, we are doing it with actually Saudi women, and then we're starting a project with Syrian artisans, probably initially in Jordan and Lebanon and southern Turkey. So it's an interesting thing, sort of doing it in other places.
That must take a fair amount of funding to expand. Where does most of your funding come from?
Yeah. Well, I suppose what I spend most of my life doing nowadays. So we are over time about half private and half public, sort of big governments, typically aid in country. So the US government has been wonderful to us. The British government has not. The Canadian government has been wonderful to us, Australian government, Indian government. Private has been primarily the Gulf and America. So Americans have been very, very generous. I suppose a combination of being interested in Afghanistan at a particular time, but also being interested in something that was some hybrid about economic development and development.
How does social media and the internet play into your mission?
I've had to learn how to use it. Actually, that's not true. I still don't know how to use it. So, yeah, it's obviously so important. The Smithsonian exhibition has been, I suppose, the first time we've been serious about it. So when you get to the end of the exhibition, and I hope you all will go, you have 6 more months. In case anyone's in DC, please, please go. It would be wonderful to see you there. There is a wall about half this size, a sort of big plasma screen at the end, which aggregates a bunch of different social media sites, Twitter and Instagram in particular, with the hashtag Turquoise Mountain. And basically, it's a running conversation. So people are taking pictures of bits of the exhibition, their kids in the exhibition. They're talking to people in Afghanistan, so all of our artisans, and we've worked with them to set up accounts, whether they have them or not, set up professional accounts, making sure they're not just randomly babbling with their friends, but this is their work account where, Samira has an account, and she's posting pieces of calligraphy that she's making. So there's a conversation between Afghanistan and Washington and other places. That has been really powerful. I mean, there's basically been like 3 million Twitter impressions from the exhibition. So I think that's the time I've seen it work best. I think it's all about pictures, basically, for us, both in selling these things, but also in transporting, connecting people to a place that is so utterly different from our life here and so far away.
Thank you very much for this presentation. It's enlightening, and particularly the emphasis on entrepreneurship and female entrepreneurship, very important. My question pertains to the long-term prospects of the benefits of picture, right? Yeah. So one question is, what protections are offered to producers of fine jewelry and so forth in a marketplace that is rather hawkish, where the intellectual property is appropriated elsewhere and so on. Second, in a global market in which middlemen historically have made the money and producers have been sort of forced into this monopoly environment, what protections are offered to them? And third, what exactly does the Institute do in its imparting to its students? Does it teach them entrepreneurship and marketing and design and all this?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's see if we can remember all these. We've got intellectual property, we've got sort of middlemen and how we protect the artisans, and we've got what the Institute actually does. So, intellectual property, yeah, there's absolutely no respect for intellectual property in Afghanistan as a whole, basically, full stop. These are typically, the designs that we're exporting are typically designed by the designers whose market we are exporting to, which I think is a key thing that's worked. In other words, even the difference between London fashion and New York fashion matters, particularly if you're talking about higher-end jewelry. So Pippa Small has a great following. She's been to Afghanistan 19 times, made 19 different lines for us. She knows her customers. She knows what they want. She knows that, you know, Tiger's Eye is on trend this year. So that really matters. Now, also, her Afghan stuff looks different than the stuff she makes in Colombia, for example. So there is an element of Afghan design in it. And often she designs with Afghan artisans. There are three Afghan designers that I know in the entire country that are real designers. Because design's a really serious thing, right? I mean, you can't just take something and draw something else that looks kind of like it and say you're a designer, right? That's one of the things that I've learned in this, is it's a very serious profession. Afghanistan, first of all, traditional crafts have always been an incredibly deferential thing, right? You know, Amin Shah, my sort of oldest tile master, will basically say that for the first 3 years of his apprenticeship, he was allowed to clean the outside, and he could sort of wipe the window clean and look in on his master. And the next 3 years, he could clean the floors inside. That was before he ever got to touch clay. Obviously an exaggeration, which Amin Shah loves to do, but that's the way it was. You would never innovate outside of what your master does. You would never disrespect the tradition in that way. There's also an element of religion in it, which is that you are, particularly in calligraphy and painting, you are representing the Word of God, and to put your own sort of spin on that is sometimes difficult. So that's where we're starting from. How do you get a young person, you say, no, do what's in your heart. Okay, what does that mean? I mean, you know, design something from inspiration. So these things are very difficult. The reason I'm going on about this is that we've decided to take it quite seriously, which is that I don't want forever the Afghan craft industry to be foreigners coming in and sort of choosing what's interesting about Afghan culture, interpreting in their own way, and bringing it out again. I want Afghans to be bringing Afghan design DNA to the world, which is unique, as every bit of design is, and interpreting the way they want, but they need to learn that. So we're going to set up essentially a design major within the Institute, where if we could even train 2-3 people a year to begin to be really serious designers, but they're going to need to have real mentoring experiences. They're going to need exposure. They're going to need to be abroad. They're going to need to either go to school or study with another designer, etc. So back to the original question of intellectual property. First of all, it isn't so much are these artisans' designs going to be stolen within Afghanistan. It's more, is the design as a whole, which is actually often Pippa's design, going to be reproduced. It is reproduced all over the place. They absolutely steal the designs. There is literally nothing we can do. I mean, there isn't, I don't know what the Afghan police would possibly do about it, or the Afghan courts. But I think that what does work there is just markets, because So Kate Spade did a design with us, a sort of internal, they used their internal designers, and bought tens of thousands of pairs of earrings. It's wonderful. And then one of my sort of feistier jewelers contacted our person sort of separately and said, you know, I can do this and I can do it cheaper and all this. And what she got from Kate Spade was actually nothing back. And Kate Spade wrote to me and said, what is this person doing? I don't, you know, because what they wanted is they wanted the guarantee of what we were putting out. I mean, obviously we are a middleman, though I'm a nonprofit, so we have a social motive. But the only thing that's protecting intellectual property, because what they're doing is, what this woman was trying to do is produce a new design. She said, I have a new design for you, which was, I'd say, a 5% alteration on the original. I mean, it was, in anyone who lives in the design world, it was a joke that it was a new design. So that was the clearest signal that she could get, that you can't do that sort of thing. And so that's the only sort of reality check that we can get on intellectual property, is just whether they can do it outside of Afghanistan, which they can't really. Second question of middlemen. This entire thing is about connecting artisans and their stories directly to consumers. So I think this is, I mean, at least as far as we're concerned, it doesn't even work, the sales pitch doesn't even work if we're not directly connecting them. Also as a charity, I mean, that's my charitable aim, so they're sort of protected by the fact that I'm not allowed to do anything, I suppose, that doesn't put them first. But I also think that what we're finding in an age of increasing internet purchasing, I suppose, is that you do get more connections, you know, directly from artisan to consumer. But middlemen, you know, that will always be an issue. But I think that this is about a higher value product that goes straight to the consumer. It's not about something cheap and faceless and nameless that is much more susceptible to sort of the 10 times markup through middlemen. And the final question, very briefly, on the Institute. So if I am Samira and I show up in my first year, I'm going to go through 3 years full-time and get an Afghan Ministry of Education certification and something called City and Guilds, which is the UK accreditation body. So they get it at the highest level. Everyone's individually certified. They put together a portfolio. And what you do for 3 years is you take about 60% practical classes and 40% supplementary classes, which are essentially IT, English, business, design. Now, that's great as a concept, and it's working very well, and we're sort of improving it over time, partially because you can't really teach business 2 hours a week to a group of people who have different education levels. Right? It's very, very difficult. So we're getting in as much as we can there in terms of basics. We talk about intellectual property, but also, so if I've got 150 students there at any given time, not all of them want to run their own business. You know, not all artists are entrepreneurs. Then that should be right. I mean, that's a sort of actually quite a weird combination. So we need to cater for 10% who want to run their own business, 25% who want to teach, and the rest who want to work in a business. Just want to earn an income, pretty straightforward, don't really want to take the risk, right? So we're catering to all those different people, and what we're finding is that the Institute should go so far down that line of introducing those different variations in training, and then we have a whole department which basically does everything from, we call it business development, but it's basically everything from sales and marketing through business mentoring. So the US government very kindly gave us a grant about a year ago, which will stretch over 3 years, which is all about the business support. So we're working with 75 businesses right now. I'd say 35 of which we made. In other words, like Samira, we met them when they were a young person. They've now built a business. We gave them incubation space. We basically bought their equipment for them, and we made those businesses. The other half we met. It's a lot in carpets and textiles because there really aren't functioning businesses in anything else. A few jewelry businesses that are outside of us. And that's about really intensive mentoring. And they come in 3 times a week, and we work on their accounts with them and work on social media and work on their marketing materials, quality control, when we have 3 different jewelry businesses who are really flailing in the gold plating department, we bring in a gold plating expert, make sure that they're doing things like the gold plating machines require that you use deionized water. Inevitably, that's like the first thing that gets cut out. People just use tap water, and then it just doesn't bind at all. So you need this constant injection of technical support to make sure the stuff is really export quality. So that's the sort of thing that's sort of something that goes outside of the institute scope, but it all fits in this ecosystem of stuff that happens in the old city.
One last question. I'm curious, when someone works with you for a number of years and develops a trade, have you tracked the implications to that student's family and how that works and the dynamics, the relationships?
Yeah. We track a lot of things. There's a lot of data involved in this sort of thing, particularly when you spend taxpayers' money. Everyone wants to know the impact of it. So, and that data really matters because we need to know too what this does to people's incomes, what kinds of jobs they're getting afterwards. So we have all of that. Your question though is specifically about sort of relationships and.
Yes, what I was trying to understand is if, for instance, you have a young woman who begins being productive and actually earning, and she has family members who perhaps are not doing as well as she.
How does that
Are they getting pulled in also, or is it, what happens?
Yeah, it's an important question. It is not an easy thing to be born an Afghan woman, I don't think. What we have found is that in the beginning we had a high proportion of women. I'd say we had 40% women students. We now have more like 30%, but they're of a different quality, I suppose, or commitment level, I'd say. So you can get a woman into a course, but halfway through it, she gets married and her family dynamic changes and then she can't go anymore, okay? That's not useful for anyone, actually. So we have gotten much better, I suppose, at the beginning. They go through like a 3-step interview process, interviews with them, their families, and it's not about whether you're a master painter. You can basically have no skill level coming in if you really want to do this, really want to make this your life's work. But you and your family need to commit to this working. So in her case, she's interesting. She's the oldest daughter of 3 girls. And because there are no boys in her family, and because her family is her family, her father said to her when she was about 20, actually, already she had started the institute, she said, I give you permission to act like a man, which meant you can run your own business and you don't need to get married until you want to. Essentially freed her from the traditional Afghan daughter role. So that was quite, and that's worked, and she runs her own business and she's not married and probably not particularly interested in it. I don't know why that happened. That's their particular family, but I think if you meet the women who go to the institute and graduate, they are in some sense self-selecting, but that's okay with me. I mean, I want to enable a group of women who really can make this work in their lives and really have the family support to do that. Not that it's easy, I think it's always probably a struggle.
I'm thinking, there's a short story by a woman named Alice Munro called The Albanian Virgin. I don't know if you've read it. You might want to at some point. But it's a story of a woman in a culture who just gets sort of trapped, and because she's not following a traditional life, she's required to be isolated.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
We haven't really seen that, but I think, again, that's because we interview the families. I mean, the people who come to the Institute are often 18 when they start. They are, in some ways, still teenagers, children, with their families. So their families need to support them. So Afghanistan is such a family-oriented society. You don't get people on their own. You don't just get single people living in the city by themselves. So I think that I'd actually be surprised to find someone who had totally rebelled from their family, living genuinely as an outcast. You just don't see it very much. I think it's almost just too hard. Yeah, we haven't seen that. I mean, I think it's
wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's making me think. I mean, there are so many wonderful elements of Afghan society about the way that the community works, and I think that's part of it, is that you don't really, people don't just leave their community, interestingly.
How is this program working in Myanmar?
Yeah.
Now that the division with the Rohingya and
Yeah.
is just curious about.
Well, I actually have some, I can show you some pictures. So, yeah, so this is our sort of introduction, is that Dawsu asked Prince of Wales to come in and sort of help out. We work with, the basic answer to your question is that we work particularly with crafts, with lots of different ethnic groups in Myanmar. So Myanmar is dominated by one ethnic group, the Burmese, and has quite a lot of conflict, particularly in the border regions. And the Rohingya that he was mentioning are a Muslim group on the Bangladeshi border, and that's not pretty at all. Really, really not pretty. We work, particularly all of our goldsmiths are from Rakhine State. What we're doing there again is buildings and crafts. So this was our first building, that's sort of before and after. The roof garden is now a functioning roof, and that's sort of before and after. Totally different type of architecture. This was a small project. We started about 1.5 years ago. So we did our first building, trained about 250 people on it. That's before and after. And then in crafts, we started in jewelry. And you get very, very beautiful gold work, basically. This is Pippa's first line there. She was so excited when she heard we were going in, so she got on the plane. That was an easy start to that, because she can get things into the fashion weeks very quickly. Now we're moving into textiles, woodwork, and lacquerware. And then we're going to do a massive building in downtown, which will be a sort of home for Myanmar crafts. And I think this is, I mean, what we would like to do for the sort of the craft industry there, and also for the downtown, and for tourism, etc., is be a massive celebration at a high level of quality, pride, authenticity of a diverse Myanmar. You know, where you've got chin textiles, and you've got lacquerware from Pagan, and you're demonstrating a more diverse society simply through different stuff. Please.
This is part of the old city of
Yeah.
So this is the colonial old center that they're preserving, and they don't want to tear this down. So in 20 years' time, when we go to Burma and we go to Rangoon, we'll still see the historic center rather than have it, be tall skyscrapers and a lot of lights.
Yeah. And you've got you do have. I mean, here you have a pretty functioning craft industry. Actually, I mean, I'm not worried that this thing is going to disappear completely, very differently from Afghanistan. But I think that the craft industry in Myanmar has two different ways that it can go. When we think of Myanmar, we think of Buddhism, of the land of 1,000 pagodas, romance, Burmese sapphires and rubies. It has a wonderful history about it. That can be a high-value producing. And also, they've been completely shut off for decades. Completely shut off. I mean, it's very sad because the education and health levels are lower than I've ever seen. But it also means that they, unlike everybody else, have continued to do things by hand. They haven't industrialized at all. So they actually can, in a world where we're increasingly focused on makers and things that are handmade, because everything is made cheaply in China or wherever else. Actually, they can work to that market. Right? So you've got that alternative. And then you've got sweatshop Myanmar. And I can tell you which is the natural trajectory. They can be the next low-cost producer. And they can absolutely ruin their environment, pay people nothing, and it can just be the nasty thing that it is in many places. So we are trying to nudge it toward this direction. So in the case of jewelry and the goldsmiths in Rakhine State, it's basically about establishing a responsible supply chain for jewelry. And having the first jewelry come out of Myanmar, which basically is this. I mean, there is nothing else in serious Western markets except our jewelry, which you actually can find in the States. Episcopal.com. Is that the first thing that people see of this country is something that's handmade, responsibly sourced, and at a very high level. So I want to try to nudge the industry in that direction. Yeah. I just wanted to say also a huge thanks in particular to Trinity for hosting and to Peggy, because it's wonderful, as I said, to be in Connecticut and speak to you all. And I just can't say enough thank you to April, because she's been such a friend to me and to Rory and to the project. And the Smithsonian exhibition genuinely was just April. I mean, it wouldn't exist without her, but it means that you have 200,000 people who have a different perspective on Afghanistan, and it's meant a huge amount to our artisans. They've been coming in and out of Washington. We've had one artisan every month for the last 9 months, and they're having sort of life-changing experiences, mentoring programs. But it's been wonderful, and that was all April, because she likes putting things together, and including all of us today. So thank you very much.
So that was incredible. Thank you for those very kind words. We now want to invite you to a wonderful reception to see firsthand, up close, and you can handle them, all these wonderful pieces from Afghanistan. And that's at Southport Galleries, which is just down the road. And the address is, I think, 335 Pequot Avenue. And it's right next to Fairfield Ladies and Women's Exchange. It's by the Horseshoe Cafe. Everybody knows the Horseshoe Cafe. So you can walk, you can ride, but it's just down the block.
See you there. Thank you.